of Delaware, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Thank you, Senator, for joining us, as always. This is not fun. It's serious. But the vice president now, according to reporting as of tonight, seems to have been engaged in the same thing Trump was engaged in, which is basically shaking down a foreign leader to get dirt on a political opponent, the candidate you're supporting, Joe Biden. Shouldn't he be the subject of an impeachment inquiry as well at this point?
Look, Chris, I think it's important that we focus on the facts here. The facts are that we've got...
I'm talking the facts.
I'm sorry?
I'm talking the facts. The facts now point that he, and not showing up for the inauguration, for his conversation with President Zelensky, he was working the same vein of opportunity that the president himself was working, to leverage the need of that country for foreign military assistance, particularly weapons to use against tanks, to get dirt on the candidate you support.
That's right, Chris. As you well know, Ukraine's been under withering assault over the last 5 years from Russian-supported separatists, and the newly elected President Zelensky of Ukraine, was desperate to get this additional military assistance. And what we just heard learned this afternoon in a Washington Post article, was that Vice President Pence may have been much more actively engaged in a series of actions designed to send a message, as President Trump conveyed in the call with new President Zelensky that we now all have a summary of. He asked them to do a favor, to dig up some dirt on his leading political opponent. And he then used the vice president later to deliver a message by directing him not to attend the inauguration of a justifiably nervous President Zelensky, and to convey to him that the aid was not going to be released, was not going to be forthcoming until they did something more. I frankly think if I were working for or advising Vice President Pence, I'd tell him to be concerned, because it seems that President Trump has engaged him quite centrally in this series of facts, these actions that are really shocking. I think this is happening, Chris, frankly, because President Trump views Joe Biden as his strongest rival for re-election. He thinks Joe Biden has the best chance of beating him, and that's why he's making these smears against Joe and Hunter Biden. And I'll remind you, in the 2016 election, President Trump attacked virtually all of his Republican primary opponents, in some cases even famously just making things up, such as when he accused Senator Ted Cruz's father of being involved somehow in the assassination of JFK. This isn't about who Donald Trump is. We know who he is. This is about what he's done as our president.
I think this raises above even presidential politics right now, Senator, because look what happened with the Russian media response when Pence called off his attendance at that inauguration over there. They jumped with glee at this because it made the point that our administration, led by Donald Trump and supported by the vice president, are supporting Putin in his war basically on endangered Ukraine. This is serious geopolitical stuff here. Does it bother you, just as an American, that we have a foreign policy and a national security driven by cheap, oppo negative politics?
Yes, obviously, Chris, the situation with regards to Ukraine generated broad bipartisan concern. Several months ago, when members of the Foreign Relations Committee and the Appropriations Committee learned that this vitally needed assistance to Ukraine was being held up for undetermined reasons, there were a number of senators who pressed the administration for answers, for insight. And one of the striking things is that Senator Durbin of Illinois offered an amendment to the appropriations markup on September 12th that would set aside some of the Department of Defense funding if this money to Ukraine wasn't released. The money to Ukraine was only released the night before that vote. And during that markup, a number of senators, Republicans and Democrats, said that supporting Ukraine in the face of Russian aggression is an important national security goal. It enjoys wide bipartisan support. And there was a lot of expressions of concern by Republicans and Democrats at that early September markup about why the president was holding up this aid. We've seen President Trump give two, I think, conflicting suggestions. He was doing it because he wanted the Europeans to contribute more, when in fact the Europeans have contributed far more than we have to Ukraine's stabilization and rebuilding. or he doesn't like giving money to countries that are corrupt. There are many other countries around the world that face corruption challenges. I'm not aware of that having been a concern of the Trump administration in the face of critically needed aid either. So I frankly think that Speaker Pelosi today did a great job of laying out a measured, fact and law-based approach to this vital investigation, and I'm hopeful that it'll move forward swiftly and with cooperation from the administration.
Thank you so much, Senator Chris Coons from Delaware. I want to, by the way, bring in right now Peter Baker, New York Times chief White House correspondent and co